Hello, Freddie. Welcome to another episode of Dadsplaining Politics.
Hey Dad, it's nice to be back. Good to see you again, as usual. We've got lots and lots of things to talk about. We were trying to cut down a few of the topics because there were so many this time around.
So, we are going to cover today all the trials and tribulations between Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump. We are then going to move on to the German election. Super interesting results that just happened yesterday, Sunday in Germany, which is fascinating given that Germany generally has Sunday as a day of rest. I was considering why they're having elections on that day, but the German elections. And then we're going to move on to the story of Congo and all the terrible things happening there. And then finally, we're going to come back to the Australian theatre and
As
talk,
we generally do.
as we generally do.
A little about that, which seems to be developing but at a very slow rate. But anyway, we'll get to that later on in the podcast. So we need to talk about Trump, obviously, as we always do. It's getting a bit tiring having to talk about Trump and, entertain him more so, entertain his thoughts and his ideas, because obviously half the time they're just like random statements out of the blue that he decides to put out into the world. So to have to analyze them and take them seriously can get a bit frustrating. I don't know about you, but it's what I've been feeling recently.
It's 30 days in to the Trump. It seems a lot longer than
Only
30
30 days
days. You
is
see what
remarkable.
craziness has gone on over 30 days. But I had an interesting discussion last night with Michael Twigg, and he was talking about, is this all a orchestrated campaign by Trump to put people off their guard and say the most outrageous things in order to get a better result? So I thought it was a really interesting discussion. What do you think about that, Freddie?
That is really interesting. I was actually looking into this the other day because I was on TikTok. You learn a lot of stuff from TikTok. I'm not going to say I was reading an article because you do learn a lot of stuff. And this sociologist, who I looked up, she does have some credibility, was saying that it is a proven strategy that leaders often use, cult leaders even, to confuse and convince people that they're doing the right thing by just putting so much shock and awe into the population. It means that the Democrats and more left-wing groups aren't able to organize and push back because they're too busy dealing with the shock from every new policy that the Trump administration is putting through. So in the time that they take to understand what that means for the country, they don't have a proper response to it. So it's quite interesting. I mean, obviously it's been very effective so far. We have talked about in recent episodes how there has been quite little pushback by other groups in America. Visibly so, at least on the international stage.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Recently, Trump's called Zelensky a dictator, and he talked about Zelensky starting the war, which is obviously a total falsehood, and that he wasn't very popular in Ukraine. He only had 4% popularity. Again, not true, 57% popularity, actually higher than Trump in the US in terms of popularity. And so I think, Ukraine and Zelensky was in shock by this because the US has supported them very well.
Mm.
On the surface, it seems like the US have just given away all their negotiating points to Russia, all the things that Russia would want.
I mean, I agree, but I think that's all Trump really cares about. And I think going back to what you were saying, obviously, about Trump calling Zelensky a dictator, that all came from Zelensky in an interview where he was asked about his response to the Trump administration's giving of aid and the negotiations and etc. etc. And he said that Trump is living in a misinformation space. And it could, it's incredibly difficult to be Zelensky in this time because obviously, like, the one thing that he's been fighting for is for Ukraine to be free and to get that support from all Ukraine's allies. And in his fierce, loyalty to Ukraine, he said something about Trump that could ironically cause massive defeats in Ukraine, right? Because he said this, Trump is living in a misinformation space. We know Trump, he was never going to take that lightly. The next day also calls him a dictator and wants to oust him from government and starts making false claims about his popularity in the country. Enough so that I think, get me right if I'm wrong about this, but he talked to Keir Starmer about it just to confirm that he was in the right, that he should still be in power and that he shouldn't have held another election. And Keir Starmer said, no, of course, you should still be in power. You don't have time to be holding elections. in a wartime, like the UK did during World War II. They didn't hold new elections. They just kept with the current leadership.
It is fascinating. And I think the other thing the US has said, they wanted $500 billion paid to them, half the rare earths in Ukraine. And Zelensky did not agree, right? Because that sort of would give mortgage Ukraine in the future. And, think about it, Ukraine's going to need so much money spent to rebuild Ukraine, etc. The whole thing is madness, I think, for the US to demand that level of money. And what I think is fascinating, Freddie, is Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are both going to Washington this week. This is a real test of them as leaders, because in fact, if Keir Starmer stands up to Trump, it may actually make him incredibly popular amongst the British people. If you think about that movie Love Actually with Hugh Grant, where the British Prime Minister stands up to a nasty American president, there's a
Yeah.
real parallel here, and it'll
It's
be
true.
fascinating.
Except I do have to say, every time I see that movie, every time I rewatch it, I think how crazy that is. How that is such an insane move to make that in no way would ever be accepted or considered a real foreign policy move in our society. But I guess, like, traditionally, what are the US going to do? They can't turn their back on one of their biggest allies. Who do they have left? Or else are they planning to create these new allies, which is why they're agreeing to every single demand that Putin puts forward. So maybe they're just breaking away from the entire
It's
Western democratic system and going for new
yes, and it's
allies.
risky for Keir, but he's already super unpopular. One of the most unpopular prime ministers early in their term.
Yeah, so surely
I
this could help.
I think it could help,
It
and
could get
him
worse.
combining forces with Macron and now Merz, soon to be the new Chancellor of Germany. I don't think they have a choice, because you can't sort of not support Ukraine in this scenario when you're a European power. This is on your doorstep. It's all very well
Yeah,
for the
exactly.
Americans. It's not right next door to them.
Yeah, no, it's the defining quality of England. I mean, of the United Kingdom in this region. That's always been their part to play. Kind of being this orchestrator of what's going on. I mean, they've been part of every single world war in the area. They've always had a part to play, and they've accepted that. They can't get all the benefits without having to sacrifice a bit as well.
And Freddie, don't underestimate the pride of these countries. You remember when China was bullying Australia, in terms of trade and everything else?
The
And
lobsters.
Australians reacted very badly to that. They say in the end, if it's going to hurt our quality of life, so be it. We're not going to agree to nonsense, and we're not going to be bullied. And I think there's a lot of most nationalities around the world feel that way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. I mean, I think that you often disagree on that point, though, which I find hilarious you're bringing it up now, because you often go and say to me, oh, well, if I were in this position, I would have left the country already, or la la la, or why aren't they making this economic deal, etc., etc. But there is
Well,
obviously that really important factor that people love their country and they're not
yes.
just gonna leave. Like, I mean, this comes back to Palestine and Gaza. Like, it's all well and good saying that they can have a new home somewhere else and that someone else funds it. Not that that would happen. But if theoretically the US were open to funding an entire new area for the Palestinians to live in, they still wouldn't want to live there. It's not just about the money, it's about who they are as people and who are they without their place and their nation and their identity and all that stuff.
I think my view is that so long as you can try and negotiate and get something economically beneficial from a trading partner, but if that trading partner becomes so extreme that it breaches the values of your country, you should stand up for that no matter the economic cost. That's my
Yeah.
view.
Okay, good. But there's an extreme factor to that, which you
Yeah, which
think
I
is
think the Ukraine, I mean,
extreme.
the whole not supporting Ukraine and just being a mouthpiece for Russia crosses that line.
I think so too, definitely. I mean, obviously, you've seen America go against every single thing it's ever believed in. If you've seen those cartoons, any of you listening online, and it has some American soldiers all lining up saying, hey, hey, General, who are we fighting this time? Are we fighting the Germans or whatever, just people from World War II? And the general's like, no, we're fighting Ukraine and we're with Russia on this one and we're with la la la. And it's so shocking to see the difference. I don't know. I think that's
No,
just
it
one of
is.
those things that's quite
But the
funny.
challenge is, Freddie, the Europeans can increase their spend, but it takes years to build up a war economy and to build all the arms, etc., needed. They're still going to need the US as a backstop, right, in this scenario. And I mean, for example, there was a discussion about Elon Musk turning off Starlink, for the Ukrainian forces, right? And
I
they're
didn't hear
screwed if
that.
that
That's
happens,
crazy.
right? Because they would be flying blind. And the nightmare scenario, he turns it off for Ukraine, but not for Russia. I mean, this is
I
just
mean, it doesn't seem like a
unbelievable.
nightmare scenario. It seems like something that's undoubtedly about to happen. I mean, this is like we have a lot of people in our family who are obsessed with Starlink and we love its capabilities. Obviously, it's a great thing when you have access to it. But if it's just causing like massive inequalities between people, it's not fair. This is the same thing with ChatGPT and AI in general, and even DeepSeek and all of this stuff that's been created recently. I think that yes, it is a great thing if it's administered to every section of like the population, everyone in the world, but otherwise it just gives some people massive advantages over others.
We
But we can
always
talk
used,
about that in another
no,
episode.
you're right. We used to talk all the time about the digital divide in technology between those
Mm.
who have and those who haven't. And there's a new digital divide with AI, obviously,
And it just
going
keeps
forward.
getting bigger, it feels like.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the Deutschland election?
Yeah, just before we move on to that though, I wanted to raise a point on the Democratic Republic of Congo because I know that we've been talking about Ukraine and Gaza and a lot of other really important conflicts for a while now, but I think that Western media tends to not focus as much on other countries such as the DRC. There've been a few articles in some prominent newspapers, but it's really horrific the stuff that's going on there, impacting millions and millions of lives. So I think we were having a look at that. Did you have anything you wanted to say to start us off?
Yes, it's horrific, Freddie, the number of deaths and the fact that this has been going on for so long. And it's also just shows you that we're victims of our own media and podcasts, etc., that focus on Western viewpoints. And the thing is, people can only absorb so much. You see, there's
Mm.
so much going on in the world in an extreme kind of way, I think, versus the last 5 or 10 years. And so things go off the boil, like listening to those things because you're just listening to the latest, biggest news point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even not to shit on you in the middle of the podcast, but even bringing up some of these topics beforehand, I remember you kind of said to me, "Oh, but we've talked about that in an episode before." And of course, yeah, the topics we haven't talked about are more attention grabbing, but that doesn't mean they're more important. Just because something's already been happening for a while doesn't mean it's any less significant to the people it's happening to. But that's another sign of the digital divide, I would say, what's happening in Congo, because obviously massive conflict. It's been going on for a really long time. The rebel group, the M23 rebels, and they're allied with another rebel group. They've taken over another city in Congo, and it's all because they have really rich minerals and things going on in Congo. And so the irony of these minerals that they are getting within the Congo is that they are being used to build all the batteries that we use in our phones and in our electric vehicles. And they're not staying in the Congo, they're being sent around the world, and these rebels are benefiting from that to be used in the phones that then we go and we hear about Ukraine and we hear about Gaza from, but we don't hear about the very conflict
Yeah, it's a
that
good
is
point.
enabling us to learn about the other conflicts. That makes sense.
The world of rare earths, suddenly it's a topic du jour
Yeah.
around the world.
Exactly. I mean, there's so little quantities of these minerals to make mobile phone batteries and stuff like that. It's really a very important discussion, and it feels like something even Trump and a lot of other bigger Western powers should have a part in, or would be more interested in having a part in than they are, if they were really being logical about their investments going into the future.
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I just have to turn off an alarm. Excuse me a minute.
Let me see if we can pause the episode. No, we cannot. Just enjoy this fun little break. No
We
problem.
bought an alarm for Coco, my younger daughter, so she should get up and it doesn't differentiate.
It seems like a problem, but anyway.
All right, Deutschland.
Deutschland. Deutschland. That's Germany for those of you who don't speak German, but you may have guessed that by
So
this point.
the Wahl in German, or the election, was on yesterday, and the CDU
Snap election.
CSU got 28.52% of the votes. So that's Merz, Friedrich Merz, who's Friedrich Merz, an ex-McKinsey guy, I think, business person. Was a colleague of Angela Merkel's, but sort of to the right of Angela Merkel.
Yeah, I think he's known as the antithesis of Angela Merkel. So I don't know how close they were when they were in government together.
Right. And so then Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, got 20.8% of the vote. Okay, number two. So they're the
coming
extreme
second, and
right
they've never
wing.
before come second in a German election. And then I know as well that the Social Democrats, which is the current Chancellor Scholz's party, they got their lowest election result in history since World War II. So obviously a lot of stuff is shifting in Germany at the moment in a really dangerous, terrifying way.
Let me just run through it because I think it is fascinating. SPD 16.4%, Grün or Green 11.61%, Die Linke, which is the left, which has had a surge actually. They got almost 9% of the votes. There's this new female leader of the left, and she's becoming rather popular. So that's quite interesting. That was an interesting thing. And then the FDP, a sort of smallish party of about 4%. So CDU, CSU, Friedrich Merz is going to need to go in partnership with somebody to have a majority because he won't combine with the AfD. In German politics, there is a firewall strategy that nobody deals with the extreme right wing. And this is what J.D. Vance was imploring Europeans to do, listen to all their voters, etc. But given the history of the Nazi Party in Germany, that's why the mainstream parties don't want to partner with the Alternative for Deutschland in this case.
Exactly. And I think Angela Merkel would be, absolutely heartbroken to see, not even just heartbroken, but be absolutely destroyed to see the way that her party would have changed if they did align with the AfD. I mean, Friedrich Merz, he may be a little more conservative, a little more right-wing, but he still believes in NATO and the power of NATO, and he can be quite liberal when it comes to economics in general. He's nowhere near being a member of. So I guess we got to be grateful for something that they didn't get even a higher share of the vote, but it's still pretty high.
We're grateful. And, the thing is, he's already come out in the last few hours talking about he can't believe he's saying this, but he thinks Germany needs to move away from the US because he's always been a very pro-US person. So that's what I think is fascinating, Freddie. As these European countries say, okay, here's the line in the sand, what will be the US reaction over time? It'll be really fascinating over coming weeks.
It's interesting because is that what they want, or are they testing them? That's the big question. Are they testing to see what they'll do and what defense that they will start committing, like the funding they're putting into defense, or do they simply just not want to be part of anything to do with any other country in the world going forward? It's a big question.
It is fascinating, and Germany has the economic power to do the third largest economy in the world after the US and China, maybe fourth, depending on Japan.
I don't think it's third. I think that they're
third or fourth. Japan is therefore third after China and the US, but big, right? Really big. The challenge is being able to build all those weapons, etc., if the US is not going to supply them. But why wouldn't the US supply them if they're being paid for them?
Yeah, but it's how much funding they're willing to put forward for it. I mean, I also know just in terms of the power that Germany has, especially within Europe, is that even though the election has happened and Friedrich Merz has been essentially elected, even though he's yet to form the coalition, there still has to be a caretaker chancellor for the next few months or so until he can form that very coalition that he needs. So I think that Chancellor Scholz will still be in charge, but that leaves quite a precarious government in Germany in a time where we don't need anything precarious. We need shit to get done.
Yeah.
So that's a scary situation in itself, that no one's really going to be leading the charge in that way. So we're going to be a vacuum in European power, and we'll see who'll step up. And like, hopefully, as we were saying earlier, Keir Starmer will understand his role, realizing he has essentially nothing to lose, and step up and play his part.
Well, we'll know this week. He and Macron are visiting Washington, so watch this space.
Mm-hmm.
And so shall we move to Australia?
Yeah, let's do that.
So latest polls are that Dutton is getting more of a lead versus Albanese. He's seen as a stronger leader, and Albanese is seen as somewhat weak. That's the latest. So the latest theory is that Albo is going to delay calling the election as long as possible to give themselves some more time. And of course, they just announced a big Medicare announcement, which is one of the
$8.5 billion cash injection.
which is one of the strengths of the Labour Party versus the Liberal coalition. And so the coalition quickly
I've also
responded and
heard-
said they will. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'll just interrupt you there. The coalition did respond and say that they will match the cash injection, but I've also done some reading into this, saying that this 8.5 billion doesn't necessarily come from a real viable funding place, that a lot of the money they're putting into Medicare is already effectively allocated, and it won't make a real difference, but it will be taken from other portfolios. This is what I'm reading from an economic analysis that this woman had made. And that's quite an interesting point as well, that it was a rushed attempt at getting a few more votes for Labour, and it doesn't have any real basis. And we've seen Labour do this a bunch in the last year or so with the social media ban, which obviously hasn't had a real effect when we consider that my younger sister, who's 12 years old, she spends every second of every day on social media. So we'll see how this really gets put into place, and if it does, and hopefully they stop running scared and do something as it gets closer to the election, because their trajectory is obviously heading in a bad direction at the moment, and Dutton is just getting more and more popular, like you said.
And it is fascinating because Dutton even came out and said he disagreed with Trump regarding Ukraine the other day. To differentiate himself, right? Which is very interesting because Albo has been very wishy-washy, not wanting to offend the US.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it comes to the point of view, he's got a difficult road to hoe because he doesn't want to upset Trump before the election and have that negativity. But in the end, you've got to be yourself and you've got to be genuine because the people notice this.
Yeah, exactly. And meanwhile, as well, we were talking a bit about the independents and how that's been changing over the past year or so. I don't know about you, but I think that there's going to be a few more independents in office next year.
I think there will be, Freddie. I think that there's no doubt that the major parties are declining in some popularity. So I think the independents will do rather well.
Exactly. Even with the limit that they imposed in government on how much funding the independents can do, it seems like independents such as Nicolette Bull and a couple others in Victoria and WA are actually doing quite well. So that may also have an effect on the government, how many votes either side gets. And I don't know, we'll see how it all plays out.
We will.
It feels like it stretches on for eternity, this
I know.
stuff.
Well, Freddie, lovely speaking to you. We'll be back at the same time, same bat channel next Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Please like us and share with your friends. We'd love more people to hear our podcast.
Yeah.
Thanks, Freddie. Have a great week.
Thanks, Dad. Bye. See you soon.